Well, we are still at the Gathering of Victorian Locomotives.
Yes.
It's being held mostly in Antonito, Colorado, but as we've mentioned in previous shows, at some point in time they packed the whole thing up and they took it to Chama, New Mexico.
Yes, and that's a fun drive over there.
This is the drive. We're just below Windy Point right here and way up in the mountains. But it's an absolutely spectacular drive. Well, in the meantime, back at Antonito, Colorado, the locomotives are all still here, but preparing to make the trip across to Chama, New Mexico, and we need to get ourselves to Chama as well.
Yes, we do.
And the best way to get to Chama, I think, is ride the train.
That's one of the best ways, absolutely.
It's a beautiful drive, but it's a much more beautiful train ride. So we got ourselves a couple of tickets on the daily passenger train. You can either ride this guy halfway over and then back, or you can buy a one-way ticket.
Oh.
Which is what we need.
I guess so.
I guess so.
Stay in Chama.
Well, I figure I'd get the car down there.
Whistle.
But we're going to ride the train one way from Antonito down to Chama, New Mexico. We chose to ride in this particular passenger car.
Aren't they beautiful?
They started off by having everybody ride in box cars back in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, you're kidding me.
And you'd get splinters in your butt and so on. And then they built a bunch of passenger cars, some of which are in this train, and those are okay. But these are the third generation cars.
Oh.
Here on the Cumbres and Toltec. And oh, they're gorgeous, they're comfortable, and just fun to ride.
Yes, they are.
Now you can see that we're crossing into New Mexico.
Again.
And then we'll be right back in Colorado. The line runs right up the border, zigzagging back and forth. I forget how many. It's like 11 crossings.
11 or 13 or something. Yeah, something like that.
Let's just call it an even baker's dozen. But you're constantly crossing back and forth between Colorado and New Mexico. This is the eastern end of the railroad. And it's considerably different than the western end of the railroad. This is much more open and sagebrushy. This is Bighorn.
Uh-huh.
And this is where we rode the train when we came up here behind the Glenbrook and the Eureka. We only came this far.
Right.
And this is, only about a quarter of the way there. It's a very long railroad. It's, I think, 62 miles.
Oh, is it? Wow.
Wow, yeah. So this is about a quarter of the way to Chama, New Mexico. Well, we're arriving in the big city.
Yes, we are.
If you want to call Sublette a big city.
Well, we could.
Population 0.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
nobody.
my kind of city.
There's like a little dirt road. Mostly you just ride the train back in here. But the Friends of the Cumbres and Toltec, Cumbres and Toltec, these guys right here, take care of this place.
Yes.
And they do work sessions. These people will spend 2 weeks up here working on the buildings and stabilizing everything. Right now they're putting a new roof on here.
Isn't that nice?
It's just so cool that these guys, there's, I don't know, I forget, like 60, 100 of the people who do this. And every year they spend 2 weeks up here working on restoring equipment or taking care of the buildings or whatever, just as volunteers.
I think it'd be fun.
Oh, that would be a gas. Now, one of the things we're going to be doing here at Sublette is taking on water in this big Mikado locomotive. You notice there's no water tank.
I can see that.
It's just a water column, and it's fed from like a lake or a stream. I'm not quite sure, but way up on the mountain there's a water source, and then this huge pipe that comes down here.
Wow.
And that's all they need, since they've got good pressure from the water source up above.
An artesian well.
An artesian well, yeah. Looks like nice fresh water
It
too.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's right here.
And we are climbing and climbing and climbing the mountain here.
Right.
And this is one high railroad. You go from high elevation to way high elevation and back down to high elevation and then back up to super high elevation.
But check that view.
Oh man. And what we're doing here is we're trying to climb up over up to the rim of Toltec Gorge. The big gorge here, and rather than running the railroad at the bottom of the gorge, which would have been virtually impossible when they built the railroad back in the 1800s, they just climbed right up to the very rim of the gorge and then carved a series of tunnels here, just 2 tunnels. But that gets you up to the very rim of the gorge, and then the railroad just sort of skirts right along the edge.
Wow.
Yeah. there's Toltec Gorge.
Isn't that beautiful?
And you can see why they didn't want to try running the railroad through there. And if you look really, really close, you can see the grade going into the gorge through a tunnel, and then it just kind of skirts right along the upper edge of the gorge on the right side there. And first we need to continue climbing, and up through a couple of different tunnels. The very first one that we're coming to here is Mud Tunnel, because it goes through some really loose dirt, so they call it Mud Tunnel. So this is called Phantom Curve.
Oh, this is neat. I love the conglomerate rock here.
Yeah, they're sort of like hoodoos,
They are.
and I guess that's why they call it phantoms.
Yes, there you go.
But notice there's a lot of rocks up there on the verge of falling down.
Yes, I can see that.
And they have to double check this track all the time because sure enough, those rocks find their way into the middle of the track.
Yeah, sure do.
And they've been doing that for over 100 years. Well, we've climbed up just about as high as we're going to get here. And the entrance into the gorge is a tunnel called Rock Tunnel.
Oh, neat.
Aptly named because it's carved out of the solid rock. And on the other side of the tunnel, you suddenly find yourself perched on the edge of Toltec Gorge.
Oh, my.
We're well over 1,000 feet up from the bottom of the gorge here.
Jeez, watch that first step. It's a Lulu.
And they warn people not to throw rocks because there are people fishing down there.
Yes, don't throw anything.
And this is a monument to President Garfield. The track crews put that in here.
Nice.
And it's an amazing place. This is probably the most famous place on the entire railroad, Toltec Gorge. And just on the other side of Toltec Gorge, we arrive at the bustling metropolis of Osier.
Osier.
Osier. And there's a big dining hall here.
Yes.
And it's the midpoint on the railroad. And so the people who are going to come up here and back will change trains here. They'll actually keep their same locomotive because 489 only works the eastern part of the railroad because it's been converted to oil, and that's the only source of oil. So we're actually changing locomotives here to engine 487, which still runs on coal and works exclusively on the western end of the railroad down to Cumbres Pass and to Chama. It's just like the other locomotive. It's a K36. One of the biggest engines. There were the K36s and 7s, which were the biggest engines that ran on these railroads, and that's the preferred engine on these scenic railroads, are the K36s. They're the same size as a small standard gauge locomotive. In fact, the K37s were standard gauge locomotives when they were built, and then they were re-gauged by moving the wheels inside the frame and just putting counterweights on the outside of the frame. But these K36s, a very similar engine, but they were actually built as narrow gauge engines and not converted. But they're still just huge.
Yes, they are.
And powerful. Now this is a really fun spot. This is Cascade Trestle, and you pass over the creek below, and it's a really impressive view of the little side canyon here as we go across the tall trestle. Well, we've been descending ever since Osier, and we've arrived at the bottom of this big valley.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Los Pinos.
No, there you go.
Yeah, and there's this beautiful trestle here in this small creek. Just lovely, and private homes here.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, it's all national forest, but these homes were, the land was homesteaded back, 100 years ago, and it's all been grandfathered in, and those building lots are worth a pretty penny.
I would imagine.
And there's a water tank here, the Los Pinos tank, and we'll be stopping for water yet again, because we go through a lot of water.
A lot, yes.
Now, as we near the top of the pass here, Cumbres Pass, we go through this big, huge loop called Tanglefoot Curve.
Yes, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, it's a beautiful spot, and one of the most interesting things about it is there's the track right up there. Mm-hmm. And that's why it was called Tanglefoot. Any crew member who was on the caboose who needed to switch to the locomotive could just jump off right here, scramble up that hill, and climb onto the locomotive as it came by in a minute.
Don't miss your step or you're going to be rolling right back down the hill.
And hence the name Tanglefoot.
Exactly.
Now, if we look closely here, we can actually see the little trail that the train crews would use. They would be climbing off the caboose right down below us there. And notice that little sort of gully right there that's kind of more flat and level. And the crews could scramble right up through here and then jump on the locomotive as it came by.
There you go.
Fun, as long as you don't
Yeah,
fall.
that's right.
And with that, we find ourselves arriving at the very top of the pass, Cumbres Pass, and the properly named little community of Cumbres, population none.
Yes.
Just a little section house where the section house people used to live and operate the switching up here. And speaking of switching, we're going to be stopping up here to do a little bit of switching.
Yes.
They put some wood cars, fuel cars for the wood locomotives here in our train, and we've got to spot them here for the wood locomotives when they come by, and that's going to involve moving these box cars out of the way and then unloading our cars and then putting the box cars back where they belong. So we've got a little tiny bit of switching to do up here at the summit. now we start the long descent down Cumbres Pass
Yes.
to Chama. And we drop 2,500 feet.
Isn't that crazy?
And so we're on 4% grade.
Yes, at the top of the world.
At the top of the world. And then by the time we get to the bottom of this hill, the brakes are going to be smoking.
Yep, a little bit.
And they're already squealing.
Yep.
And this hill is really hard on the brakes, and they're constantly checking to make sure there isn't a malfunction like a wheel which is locked up. Because you can just hear what the brakes are screaming their protest
Yes.
as we proceed down this hill. So we mentioned earlier that the friends of the Cumbres and Toltec come up here and work on the buildings, and they also work on the cars, but they also volunteer their time to be docents on the passenger trains.
Yes.
And just kind of tell people what's going on and so on.
A bunch of us are getting a little bit too old to be climbing around on houses and roofing and shingling and doing all that. But unfortunately, again, the only ones who can probably come up here and stay are those of us who are past a certain age. But we would, you know, if you can't come back to work a work session, I know they usually run in 2-week blocks. You can come up and work part of it or all of it. You know, a lot of guys come up, spend a week working in the yard down there doing something, and then they spend another week riding the train and playing around and, you know, just doing different things. So come on back and ride with us again. Thanks for coming.
So at this point, the brakes are smoking more than the locomotive.
A little bit, yeah, I'd say so.
And it doesn't smell like coal smoke anymore.
No.
It smells like burning brakes.
Yes, a little bit unsettling. But
We are getting to the bottom. This is the other tall trestle. This is the Lubato Trestle.
yes.
And again, we're going to cross over a small creek way above the creek, and it's just really a neat place. Well, we're coming up on a rather famous tree, that tree to the left, Juke's tree.
It's half missing.
It's half missing, and there was a photographer, Juke, who used to take pictures of the trains coming and going out of Chama, and this was his favorite place to do that, hence the name Juke's tree.
I see.
But it also marks the end of our trip. We are now arriving in Chama, New Mexico.
We are.
And we'll be crossing over the river here on a big steel truss bridge. And here we are in Chama, New Mexico.
Right.
A beautiful town here, and the whole show is moving down here for the next weekend.
I imagine.
And we are here to join it.
Yes.
But this is I think the funner part of the ride. Notice we have a crew member here checking our brakes to make sure nothing is locked up or burned out.
Right.
Because that was a cantankerous ride down the hill there, and
I can only imagine
they're always double checking the brakes. Well, soon the other locomotives joined us down here.
They did.
And they now ran trains up the hill from here, and the whole festivities moved to this end of the railroad, and that was really fun.
That was.
It's really neat to see these old Victorian locomotives here at the old structures.
Right, it's like stepping back in time.
It really is. Well, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, you can fix that just now by clicking on the blue button. Are we ready for that? Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday as we restore one of the boxcars with the friends.